All right, guys, for today, we are going to move on from just factoring into solving. So this chapter, the main purpose of chapter 4 is to solve quadratics, solve things that are an x squared. So factoring is the first way that we solve. Then we'll move into the square root method, and we'll look at the quadratic formula. Okay. There's also another method, completing the square, that we actually will not do in this chapter, only because I only have you for one semester and something's just got to go. And that's one thing that I honestly did not remember how to do it until I started teaching Algebra 2 again. Does that tell you how often I used it, right? So if there's something that's got to go, that was going to be it. But factoring, solving by factoring, I use all the time. And like all the way through like calculus and all of that, those of you that are moving on, you will use factoring all the time. Okay. All right, so in order to solve by factoring, we use what's called the zero product property. The fact, if you never remember that that's called that, that's fine, okay? But that's what it's called. So if I look at what the actual property is, if a times b equals 0, then what do we know about either a or b? Say that again. Good. One of them has to be 0, right? So either a equals 0 or b equals 0. Because the only way to get 0 when you multiply is for one of them to be 0, okay? So kind of along those lines, if I have 5 times x equals 0, what must x be? X must be 0. What about here? If x times x minus 3 is 0, what do I know about either one of those? Say that again. Or somebody said it. Or x minus 3 equals 0, right? If one of these has to be 0, same thing. This is just two big pieces, right? So either x is 0 or x minus 3 is 0. One of them has to be. Well, x equals 0 is one answer, and then I can solve this one. And then x equals 3 has to be the other one, because that would make one of them a 0. Now, x cannot be two different values at the same time. Okay, if I say x is 0, that means every x in my problem is 0. So if I look at it, 0 minus 3 is negative 3. But negative 3 times 0 is still 0. So that works. If I plug in 3, 3 minus 3 is 0 times the 3 in front, still 0. Okay? I wouldn't have to distribute, since inside would just be all numbers. So it would just be, you clean up like terms. All right, so 0 or negative or positive 3 are both answers there. Now, one thing you're going to learn, especially in chapter 5, is the exponent that you have, x squared. That tells you how many answers you're going to have. You're going to have 2 answers. Okay? So everything we solve in this chapter, we should have 2 answers, because everything's an x squared. All right, so what about the next one? X plus 2 times x minus 1. What do I know must be true? Either x plus 2 equals 0, or x minus 1 has to be 0. Because those are the two things being multiplied, so one of them has to be 0 in order for the whole thing to be 0. So then if I solve those, x equals negative 2, and x equals 1 are both answers that'll work for that problem to make that work. Now, I have a little picture of a graph up top. I don't have the actual equation up there for what that one is. But anytime you graph a quadratic, it's going to look like that shape. Right? Does anybody know what that shape is called? Starts with a P? Parabola. Good. So anything x squared is going to be a parabola. It's either going to be that way or it's going to look like a U. It's going to flip the other direction. But where it's crossing the x-axis, those are your answers. So like if I would graph this, it would cross at negative 2 and 1. That's where it would cross on the graph. If I graph this one, it's going to cross at 0 and 3. So that's one way, if you're comfortable with the graphing calculator, you could always graph them and see where it crosses. Those would be your answers. Now, next chapter, we'll really get heavy on the graphing calculator, because we're going to look at x cubed, x to the 4th, x to the 5th, x to the 6th, things like that. If it's an x to the 6th, how many answers will you have? 6. Yay. But if I can look at the graph on those and find a lot of them just by looking at the graph, that's what we're going to do. So the graphing calculator becomes really important next chapter. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our steps for solving by factoring then. So first thing we want is the equation has to be in standard form. Do you guys remember what standard form is? It's going to be ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So standard form has the whole thing set equal to 0, which is what we were just looking at, right? If I want it to be either this or this has to be 0, I have to set it equal to 0 to start. Okay? Standard form meaning I want my x squared, then my x, then my number. And everything we factored to this point, that's the order it's always been in. Okay? You're going to factor each equation completely, as far as you can possibly factor. So pulling out GCFs if you can. Go ahead and factor in the two sets of parentheses. And then you'll set each factor equal to 0 and solve, which is what we were just doing on the previous slide. That previous slide, though, already had the two sets of parentheses. It was already factored for you. So now they're not going to be factored for you to start. All right, so number one, solve each equation by factoring, and then you can check your answers. So it's already in standard form, right? It's got my x squared, my x, and then my number, set equal to 0. So we will go ahead and factor. Is there a GCF in here? Nope, no GCF, so we'll set up our parentheses. My last one is negative. How do you multiply to get a negative? Good, 1 plus, 1 minus. Options for A, 1 and 1, so I know it's 1x and 1x. And then options for C, we have 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. We're trying to get a 3x in the middle. Good, x plus 6 and x minus 3. Right, remember, if your A value is just a 1, then we can look at which one of those just gives me the middle one, right? And again, I can double check. That's going to be 6x minus 3x gives me a positive 3x, which is what I wanted, okay? All right, once it's factored, directions are to set each factor equal to 0 and solve, right? Because if this times this equals 0, one of these has to be 0. Oops. So x plus 6 equals 0, or x minus 3 equals 0. All right, and then when we solve, we get x equals negative 6, or x equals positive 3. Now, I said this, you can check your answers. What should happen when I plug these back into the original? You should get 0. Right? So if you would plug them back in, again, one at a time, right? If x is negative 6, this is negative 6 squared, don't forget the parentheses, plus 3 times negative 6 minus 18. And again, you can grab your calculator, just type the whole thing in if you want. But what is negative 6 squared? That's a positive 36. 3 times negative 6 is negative 18. 36 minus 18, does it equal 0? Yeah, so it works. And you can try the same thing with the 3. Right? So if I have 3 squared plus 3 times 3 minus 18, 3 squared is 9. 3 times 3 is 9. So 9 plus 9 minus 18, it is 0. So you can check every single answer. And how do you know you found all the answers? How many should I have? I should have 2. Is it possible the two answers are the same number? Have you ever factored and you get like x minus 4, x minus 4? Yeah, it's possible the two answers are the same number. That's possible. Okay, but you should always get 2 since they're starting with x squared. All right, what about number 2? What will you have to do first on that one? Good, you have to move that 12 over, right? So x squared minus 7x. When I bring minus 12 over, what happens to it? Good, positive 12. All right, it needs to be in standard form to start. Is there a GCF? Nope. So no GCF, I'm going to jump right to my 2 parentheses. My last one's positive. How do you multiply to get a positive? Good, 2 positives or 2 negatives. In this case, which one do I want? 2 negatives. Otherwise, I'll never get a negative in there. Options for A. 1 and 1, so 1x and 1x. And then for 12, 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. I'm trying to get a 7. Good, 3 and 4. Again, doing your mental check, right? Negative 3x minus 4x is negative 7x. So still check. Don't just assume I plug numbers in and they work, okay? All right, and then once it's factored, to solve this, I know one of these has to equal 0. So either x minus 3 equals 0 or x minus 4 equals 0. And then I can solve. So we add 3. So either x equals 3, add 4, or x equals 4. How many of you have learned how to do this before? 2. Okay. At least 2 that are talking to. All right, what about number 3? I'm going to tell you right now, number 3 is probably one of the easiest problems I could give you, and it is by far the most missed. You guys overthink things. Way overthink them. So what do you do first? Say it again. Good. Put it in standard form. So it's going to be 4x squared, move this over, minus 3x equals 0. And this is where people look at that, and they look at that, and they're like, I have no idea what to do with it. What's the first thing of factoring? What's your first rule of factoring? Which is an x. Guys, don't forget, variables are part of your GCF as well. I can take an x out of both of these. So if I take out an x, I'm left with 4x minus 3. If there's no longer an x squared, can you factor it? No. Everything I factor has to have an x squared to keep factoring. I don't have an x squared, which means I'm done factoring. All I could do was take out an x. Okay? So from here, either this or this has to be 0, right? So either x equals 0. That one's nice and easy. Or 4x minus 3 equals 0. And then I just have to solve that side. So we'll add 3. So 4x equals 3. Divide by 4. And x equals 3/4. So I found my 2 answers. But do you see why people mess that one up all the time? They look at that and they're like, difference of squares, because there's only 2 things. It's got a 4, that's a perfect square. X squared's perfect. It's got a minus sign. It's got 2 terms. What's the problem? Why is that not a difference of squares? 3 is not a perfect square. And it's got an x on it, which doesn't have a perfect square. Okay, so we cannot forget that GCF has to come out first. Number 4. Is it in standard form? Is it your x squared? Yeah, it's set equal to 0. It's in standard form. All right, so I'm ready to factor. GCF? -2. Good. Remember, that first one's negative. You have to take that thing out of there. In this case, I can take out the negative and I can take out a 2. So if I take out a -2, be careful with your signs. What are you left with? Good. X squared minus 9. Taking out that negatives, flipping all those signs. Does that factor again? You have 2 terms? A minus sign? Are they both perfect squares? Yeah. That's my favorite type, right? They're the easy ones. How does it factor? Good. I just like my plus first. Doesn't matter. You can put the minus first. I don't know why. I've always put the plus one first. All right, so there we go. It's factored. So now I solve, right? What are my answers? Does that -2 out in the front, does baby brother help me? This is where people always get themselves confused. What am I solving for? X. Does baby brother have an X? So I don't care about him. Okay? Baby brother, he's part of my problem, right? He helps me get back to where I started, but I'm solving for x. So the fact that he's sitting here does not affect the fact that my x's are here. The part with the x plus 3, that one could be 0, or the x minus 3 could be 0. I can't change -2. He's a -2 no matter what's going on in this problem. But if I multiply a -2 times a 0, what's going to happen to the -2? It goes away. It turns into a 0, okay? So just be careful. In this case, baby brother does not give me an answer, right? X marks the spot. X is where I'm going for. That's what I'm solving. That's what I care about. So solving here, this one will give you x equals -3. Add 3 to the other side. X equals +3. I see people all the time, they'll write x equals 3, -3, and -2. I'm like, how many answers should you have had? 2. Okay, not 3. All right, number 5. What do you do with that? Okay, should I move the 2x squared over, or should I move the 5x and the 3? Truthfully, you could move either. But the easier option, would you say? 5x and the 3. Why would I not want to move my x squared? It'll make it negative. And if it's negative, what do I have to do? I got to take out a negative. That's a lot of opportunities for you to mess up your signs. Okay? So me personally, I'll move. If I have to move something, I'll always move things to keep that x squared positive. I'm going to rewrite every piece of it anyway in the next line, so it doesn't really matter which ones I move. All right, so I'm going to move the -5x over, make that +5x. Take the +3 and move it over. Becomes -3. All right, so it's in standard form. My x squared, my x, my number. Is there a GCF? Nope, no GCF, so I can go right to my 2 sets of parentheses. Last one's negative. How do you multiply to get a negative? 1 plus and 1 minus. Options for A, 1 and 2, and options for C. All right, not many options, but not as easy as our last ones, right? So if I go 1x and 2x, should we go 1 and 3 or 3 and 1? 3 and 1, okay. 3 and 1. Definitely check. I get 6x minus 1x. Did that give me a positive 5x? So I that one works. Remember, if my signs are backwards, I just could have flip-flopped the 6 or the plus and the minus, right? All right, so I know it factored it good. One of those has to be a 0, so that means either x plus 3 is 0 or 2x minus 1 is 0. And we just have to solve. So we subtract 3. X equals -3. Add 1. 2x equals 1. Divide by 2. And we get x equals half. Now, as time goes on, and I know some of you may be at this point already, and I'm fine if you are. As time goes on my papers, and as I work through these, you'll see me write it in standard form. You'll see me write it factored, and then I'll just write the answers. I'll skip all this middle stuff eventually. Okay? If you were to that point now, I know a couple of you probably are, I'm okay with that. You can just show it factored, answer. If you can solve that in your head, I'm okay. But be careful, some people jump to that really soon and then they forget to change their signs as they move it across the equals, so just be careful. All right, why don't you guys try number 6? Number 6. All right, walking around, I noticed some of you had like a 3/5 for an answer, some of you had a 1/5 for an answer. And I kept saying, make sure you check that, right? And then I watched 2 different people who had those different answers, both of which went through and checked their work and then didn't change it. So I don't know if we have a problem with our checking or what's going on there. All right, first thing, writing this in standard form, we know we need to move the 6x over. And only a couple of you seem to have an issue with this, which I was really proud of. When you're moving it over, you remember you want your x squared, then your x, then your number. So this 6x, when it comes over here, it should come after that as minus 6x, and then the minus 2. As long as whatever sign's in front, the plus or the minus in front of it, stays with that number, I can rearrange the order, okay? That doesn't matter. All right, from here I could take out a 2 as my GCF. So I'm left with 10x squared minus 3x minus 1. A couple of you lost the 1 on the end there. All right, factoring further, setting up my parentheses. My last one is negative, which means 1's a plus, 1's a minus. Options here are going to be 1 and 10 or 2 and 5. And this is just going to be 1 and 1. So if I go 2x, 5x, 1 and 1, right, this is going to give me 5x minus 2x, which is a positive 3x. I don't want a positive 3x. I want minus. So my signs need flipped. All right. So there's what it should look like factored. A 2 up front, a 2x minus 1, and a 5x plus 1. Baby brother, does he give me an answer? Nope, no x on him, so I don't care about him. So 2x minus 1 equals 0. 5x plus 1 equals 0. Solving, and I have to add the 1 and then divide by 2. So x equals 1/2. On this side, subtract the 1, divide by 5, and we get negative 1/5. So we should have had half and negative 1/5. Questions? Those of you that maybe had a 3/5 in there, did you put your x in the wrong spot? I didn't my guess where that one came from, because then you would have went 1 and 3 for an option. Really, it was just 1 and 1. All right, number 7. All right, we should set it equal to 0 first. So 4x squared minus 28x, moving the negative 48 over becomes positive 48. At a quick glance, this one looks like it's going to be really hard, doesn't it? Those numbers are big. For what? I take out a 4. So when I take out the 4, the problem looks a lot nicer. Right? If you divide 4 out of everything, I'm left with x squared minus 7x plus 12. Now it's down to my a value is just a 1. So this makes this one that much easier. All right, so we'll factor further. My last one is positive. Is it 2 plus or 2 minus? 2 minus, good. Options for A, 1 and 1, so 1x and 1x. All right, and then 12, we do have 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. 3, 4. Again, you can check, that's going to be negative 3x minus 4x is negative 7x. Baby brother, give me an answer. Nope, there's no x on him. So x minus 3 equals 0, or x minus 4 equals 0. And then I just solve both of those. So either x equals 3, add 4, or we get x equals 4. So both 3 and 4 are answers that'll work to make that equation true. If you graphed that, where would it cross the x-axis? At 3 and the 4, yeah. We'll kind of throw that in every so often. That way, when we get to chapter 5, it becomes a little more natural for you guys to kind of see that. All right, we got 2 to go, guys. Almost done. Number 8. Yes. When I make this one set equal to 0, you have like terms that need to go together. Right? You have an x over here and an x over here. So I'll subtract this x, and I'll end up with 6x squared. What does this become? Good, that's a 7x. And then I bring the 5 over, minus 5. So be careful. When you go to set it equal to 0, if there's like terms, go ahead and put those together. Right? X squareds go with x squareds, x's with x's, and plain old numbers with plain old numbers. GCF? Nope. All right, no GCF, so we'll set up our parentheses. Last one is negative. How do you multiply to get negative? Good. 1 plus 1 minus. I'm training her. She'll get it eventually. All right, options for A. Good. 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Options for C. Just 1 and 5. Okay, so do you want to go 1 and 6 or 2 and 3? 2 and 3, okay. 2x, 3x. 1 and 5, 5 and 1. 1 and 5, okay. It's all right if you don't know, you just throw them in, try it out, see what works. So checking, that's 3x. My outside gives me negative 10x. Did it work? Am I close? Just flip my signs. Yeah, that's going to give me a negative 7x. I want positive. So my signs are just backwards. All right, so there it is factored. And then one of those has to be 0, right? So we just set them equal to 0. 2x minus 1 equals 0. 3x plus 5 equals 0. So we add 1. 2x equals 1. Divide by 2. So x equals half. Subtract 5 and divide by 3. So negative 5/3. And improper to me is way better than mixed numbers. Okay, leave them improper. They're a lot easier to work with. How we doing, guys? All right? You got one more in you? On your own? Number 9, guys. Number 9. All right, guys. Looks like most of you did really well moving that like term over. So we get 9x squared minus 16 equals 0. All right, so you have like terms and you subtract the 18 to give you negative 16. And then there's no GCF, but this is my favorite. Some of you I know like to see it written, there's no x term. So if you prefer, you can always rewrite it so you see that 0x in the middle to help you kind of recognize I need those to cancel when I check my work. Okay, but otherwise, this is the two terms, minus sign, they're both perfect squares. Last one's negative. How do you multiply to get a negative? 1 plus 1 minus. And then square root of 9x squared is 3x. Square root of 16 is 4, so 4 and 4. Again, if you check, you're going to get 12x minus 12x. You want that 0x in the middle, okay? Those ones are my favorite because they should be the least amount of work you have to do. All right, then we have to set each one of these equal to 0. And when we solve, you would get x equals a negative 4/3 and x equals a positive 4/3. Sorry, I skipped showing my work on the solve there. How are we feeling with factor by, or solve by factor? Doing okay?